Hi folks, welcome to the Creative Nomad, presented by TrueAwesomeLife.com. I'm your host, JP Adkins, and I created this podcast because I want to tell the stories of the radicals, the ones who are out there making the world a better, more beautiful place, the amazing authors, artists, musicians, thought leaders, coaches, and yes, nomads who are out there living their true awesome lives and want to help others do the same. Are you ready to live your true awesome life? Go to TrueAwesomeLife.com and start your journey today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Creative Nomad. Unfortunately, John could not make it with us today, and I thought I would just come on live just for a couple minutes because one of my really good friends and mentors, Michael Faber, actually gave us a challenge not too long ago, actually about 15 minutes ago, and that is, what is it that you're doing social media for, right? What are you really trying to do? And I thought that it was such a profound question. I thought I would go live real quick and just say, the reason I'm on social media, the reason I do everything I do, right, is because I know what it's like to be super stressed, spiritually exhausted, and overcommitted when you're feeling stuck in someone else's story because I was living for everyone else. I'm here to help everyone take control of their lives and start writing their own stories so that we can create a world where everyone can live in creativity, authenticity, empowerment, and they're free to live anywhere and with whomever they choose without fear or lack. How much are we coming from lack? Now, I really do know that it's not going to be easy, but if a lot of us get together, it really is possible. Now, I do that in a lot of different ways. The Creative Nomad Show is one of them, and I love this. Oh, hey, awesome. And John made it. Give me 1 second. Let me bring him on. John.
Hi.
Welcome. How
I was
are you
getting worried. I was left out backstage.
I hate when that happens. I literally switched off for just a second, and I was like, oh. And then I came back and I was like, oh, John is actually here. Welcome to the Creative Nomad Show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm in the UK, so a little bit chilly. It's about to start snowing.
Yeah.
It has started snowing. So other than that, it's good.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm in Detroit, in Michigan. So today is supposed to start snowing in about 4 hours. And then we're going to have another snowstorm. Yesterday it melted. We were at 45 degrees, so today it's going to freeze again, and that's just how Michigan goes in March. You never know what you're going to get. So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
How long have we got? What do you want to know?
I have a half hour. So let's start with this. Why is it that you actually? What is your why? Why do you do what you do?
That was a question I asked myself 20 years ago. I'm from New Zealand, little wee tiny country outside the sort of the far away from anywhere as you can get. And in New Zealand, there's 5 million people. It's not tiny, but relatively so. And one of the big things there when you're in your early late teens, early 20s, is to go overseas. So we call it OE, overseas experience, because as a New Zealander, I had a visa to work in Europe, to work in England for 2 years. So about 70% of the population actually who's worked overseas. And most of the population has a degree as well. So it's a little bit of a strange country. I mean, it's 5 million people and it punches way above its weight. Mm-hmm. But I left New Zealand to go traveling, and that was 35 years ago. I never quite got back. and so I've had a pretty, eclectic, very different life. I've lived in Europe, France for 8 years. England, we're back in England now. I've been here about 6-7 years. I've lived in Australia, New Zealand, obviously. I used to live in Fort Lauderdale in Florida, and I was in San Diego for 6 months. And I've just spent the last 10 years in Myanmar, in Burma.
Okay.
And that was pretty exciting. We arrived just before they got democracy after 2 generations. So they're under dictatorship for 2 generations. We arrived literally a month before the first sort of election. And then we've had to recently leave. If you know anything about Myanmar, it's back in civil war and the dictatorship, the armies moved back in. So we were there for in the last 50 years, the 10 years of their democracy, which was a phenomenal experience. One of the most amazing countries to live in. Still was then, now it's back is literally cut off from the world. It's bigger than Germany, 55 million people, gets a couple of 100,000 tourists now.
Yeah, that's kind of sad, especially, you know, I think there's a lot of countries out there that just don't have the reputation for a place to visit, you know.
You couldn't visit because it was under dictatorship.
Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, the places, the things I've seen. My wife is, she's English, British. Her father was from Dominica, so Caribbean.
Okay.
So she's got black hair, but it's really curly, very tight curls. We used to go to Mandalay, when I was working in Mandalay, the second city in Myanmar, and people would follow her around because they had never seen anybody with anything but black straight hair.
Wow.
So that's how far removed it is. So in all my travels around the world, that was one of the questions I asked. Why do we do what we do? I was lucky to, and I've worked with some of the richest people in the world that you wouldn't have heard about. You know, people like Bill Gates come on as guests when I'm working with these people. So I worked with that group, and then I left that industry. And 21, I did Tony Robbins University. And really, and I still use a lot of his stuff because what he uses is neuro-linguistic programming. But I also recognized at that stage that it's manipulative. So I can either change my language to affect the relationship we're having or with the audience. And I can do other things like that. But that's not answering that question for me. Why do we do what we do? And I was really lucky a year or so after I'd worked with been at Tony Robbins University to meet a mentor, phenomenal guy who was David Grove, recognized as a genius in psychotherapy. He did the early work on autism, Asperger's, and we work with abuse victims and vets with PTSD, that sort of thing. And what we were doing, what his research was showing, was that all this why we do what we do is in the unconscious, and then it comes across into our conscious and so our front brain, and we try and communicate. The unconscious doesn't have language. It works in symbolism and metaphor. So I worked a lot with clients in metaphor, starting to understand why we do what we do, where it comes from, and yeah, I could talk for half an hour on this. And that's helped me a lot to understand why we do what we do. So my work now, I coach coaches because, you know, lots of us have, lots of coaches they've done Tony Robbins or Bob Proctor or Peter Sage, who I do a lot of work with. And they do the sort of what you'd say, the waking up work, you know, when you start to become aware of your values, your beliefs, your emotions, this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And well, that's all great. If you want to be a coach, you run into that stumbling block, imposter syndrome, or getting triggered by your clients, or ending up empathizing too much and ending up going down the rabbit hole with your clients. So I work with those coaches. Coaches, I mean, not just coaches, but people that have gone through that initial waking up period, becoming aware of their emotions coming up for them, but then they get stuck. And so some people would call what I do shadow work.
Awesome.
Which is working, it's shadow work, but the way I do it is to work with the client's unconscious. Now, it's totally client-led. Mm-hmm. Very few interventions are client-led. So, I mean, I can, not all the time, now and then when I've measured a client enough, I don't need them to say anything because 90% of our communication is non-verbal, and I'm working at that level. Words get in the way. You know, we both speak English, and we're probably communicating 70% of the time because you creator, I'm telling you the story, and it's coming from a metaphor, and I'm putting it into words, which is not a great translation. You're hearing those words and you're building your own metaphor. So we have two metaphors which couldn't be further apart, even though we speak the same language, separated by a common language, you say. So I work with people to allow their unconscious to evolve why they do what they do, what their blocks are, what their triggers are, what their shadows are, all this sort of stuff. And of course, I have no idea about what your blocks are. On a conscious level, you probably do understand some of them, but why do you do them? On an unconscious level, you probably have limited understanding of why you do them, because a lot of them were formed in your really early childhood, post-conception, through the womb, to a few years after birth. At that formative stage when we're relatively a blank slate, the world is non-dual. Everything is one. There's not me and dad, or me and mum, or me and the cat, or me and the coffee cup. Everything's one. And at that level, when an incident happens, when an event happens, because a baby at that stage, an embryo, an infant, can't think. They can't critically think. They can't process. This event happens, and it's huge. It's life-threatening, because they don't know how to process it. Mm-hmm. That's where all our behaviors come from. You're not born with the fear of going on stage, or as a coach, imposter syndrome, or you acquire it from your environment, your peers, your family, culturally from the wider environment. It might be generational, all sorts of impacts there. But at that young life, you form these emotional hooks, these patterns. So I help client to, on an unconscious level, unwrap and create metaphors to integrate the things that are blocking them. You know, we don't have a fear of going on stage when we're born. We acquire it. Now, I can do NLP. I can do some Tony Robbins tricks to get myself on stage, and I've done that. Hasn't cured the problem.
Yeah,
I still have a fear. So what happens is, I can press it down, suppress it. That's why we have dis-ease. Mm-hmm. And it'll come out some other way. I'll start smoking because my unconscious is like, I need to protect, my host, me. This is scary. What else am I going to do? So, I start smoking or drinking or been watching television, on Netflix. And people consciously struggle to understand that. So, it's why we do what we do. Invariably, the person themselves, you probably don't know why you do what you do because it's unconscious.
Yeah.
So it's a big question.
And it's funny because so much of what we do is in that unconscious. And I think that we don't realize how much of our lives were actually created back when we were, preschool, and then it keeps going. We make statements all the time. One of the things I talk about in my coaching programs, we make statements all the time, and those statements become law and rules that you live your life through. So, your worldview is set up probably in like second or third grade when the teacher asks you that a question and you get it wrong.
Yeah. What's the story? Little Johnny's in class and the teacher says, "Where's Jamaica on the map?" And little Johnny goes, "Oh, it's on page 39. No, it's not. No, don't be stupid. It's not on." So one of the other kids in the class stands up and says, "It's there." And Mary points to the map and says, "That's Jamaica." And the teacher goes, "Yeah, great. Yes, exactly. That's Jamaica. Johnny, sit down. Don't say anything. What have you done?" Little Johnny was right because Jamaica was on page 39 of the atlas.
Yeah.
And there we have it born in that simple interaction that today, little millennial Johnny will have no concept of remembering.
Right.
But the emotional hook is there. And when he goes on stage, it's like the teacher's going to tell him off. Now, he doesn't think teacher. He just feels the emotion. And then the behavior happens. It's so simple. Teachers, I think, when we were, a few generations back, mum and dad was out fighting, was out, chasing tigers or bison or whatever, and mum was in the fields planting the crops and that, and grandma and granddad, our parents, looked after us, and we got that sort of education.
Yeah.
Today, kids get shunted off to school at 4 or preschool at 4 years old. So who's teaching them? Some 21-year-old that's got a degree or multiple degrees that has no life experience. Now, I'm not judging that. I'm just saying a really different type of education for that young child.
Well, one of the things that I think that we forget is that in the Western society, especially, we don't have a coming of age. We don't
Especially
create
men.
adults.
Especially
right?
men.
Yes. So we never. So in the U.S., for instance, there are some cultures like the Jewish community that they have the bar mitzvah, bar mitzvah. There are some, but in general, there's just not that
Absolutely
thing, and so we never have that transition. And so
it's quite major for males, because boys, they'll live at home, boys, when they're really young, they'll be around the family unit, but they would have got to that stage. And I'm from New Zealand, so the Maori culture had a similar thing where the young teenage boy, 11, 12 years of age, and it was the same with the Indians in America and lots of those tribes. The young boy was pulled away, and it was quite a life-threatening thing at that age. Life-threatening, hopefully not life-threatening. That was that coming of age where they learned what it was to be masculine. Today, it's not there, and I think women still, because they don't have that physical thing where they one of the stories I tell is when I was growing up, there was a bridge in the town where I was, and you came of age when you jumped off the bridge, because it was like, it was 18 feet. It was really big. But you got brave enough to do that. Now, women wouldn't do that. Boys do. But that was when I was young. Today, there's barbed wire and there's notices saying don't jump and danger. And so boys don't get to, fall over and scratch their knees and maybe break their bones. They don't get that transition.
Yeah.
And that's not helping males, I think, that
whole, I agree. I think that we have this space where we're, one of the problems that I see in society as a whole is that we don't get to take that responsibility. We don't get handed that responsibility. So then we have a kid, and then all of a sudden we have the responsibility, but we've never had that permission. And I believe that a lot of our actions, we need permission to do, right?
Yeah.
A lot of our attitudes, we have to have that kind of handover. And in this community that I'm in right now, I lived here for a while. I've been nomadic for a little bit, but I lived in this community for about 6 years. And I got involved in the community. And one of the things they were talking about is that they used to do all kinds of festivals, but no one picked them up from the older elders, right? So there was this person that kind of like chaired this festival. And then, a generation later, no one does it because no one picked it up. No one they don't realize that there was a whole system behind that.
Yeah. And
I think that in a lot of ways, we're suffering from that now. Now we're 2 more generations removed from that. It hasn't been around for 2 generations, and they're like, okay, well, what are we doing? And we see everyone staying at home longer. We're seeing, the irresponsibility of all of it.
It's what was I going to say? It's but we're all much busier than we've ever been before. I mean, I'm a lot older, and life seems to go faster as you get older. But from what I understand, is it's not just me; it's everybody. Everything's getting faster. But I suppose more the point is, what can we do to change this? I think COVID has, for all the clouds of COVID, the silver lining is people are stepping back and they're going, I don't want to do this anymore. I mean, on just one instant, my wife used to spend 45 minutes on the bus going to work and 45 minutes coming back. It's an hour and a half of her day, which she wasn't paid for in conditions that she wasn't comfortable in every day. And then COVID came along and said, no, you have to stay at home. So she stayed at home for a year. Oh, stop now. You need to come back. It's like, well, what? Why? Yeah, I mean, you didn't need me for a year. She was still doing a job, obviously.
Mhm.
You didn't need me for a year. Now I have to come back. It's a hard argument for a business to have. So, yeah,
And
COVID's changed it.
it has in a little bit, because I think that we had to come back and like realize that our system wasn't working. Like we all knew it wasn't working, but
Yeah.
now we like got a real big clue. Oh wait, this doesn't work.
It was like a house of cards. It was sort of, we knew it was a house of cards, but COVID came along and collapsed the house of cards. It doesn't work.
Mhm.
It just doesn't work. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I think that one of the great things is that we started looking at it, right? We really did start looking, but we're losing that social interaction more and more and
Critical.
more and more
Yeah.
and more. And I find for me, like I find it really difficult for me myself, and I know what I'm doing, right? I know here what I'm doing, but I find it really difficult to even go out. I typically end up getting carry out instead of going into a like even when I go out to eat, I get carry out. Like
Yeah.
I don't have those kind of interactions anymore. So
It's hard, isn't it? I think, go back to my story about jumping off the bridge. For boys, it's about learning those physical boundaries.
mhm,
But it's learning those boundaries in when you and I don't know what's going to happen with that really formative generation, the I think it's the 10, 11, 12-year-olds, where they really start to develop the understanding of relationships, the boundaries, what to do, what not to do. And they were the ones that are going to be affected massively by lockdown because they couldn't relate because it was
Yeah.
just the little family unit. And mum and dad, if dad's there, hopefully, are under incredible amount of stress because you're in lockdown. You still got to do your job, so you're stuck at home. You're stuck on the computer on Zoom. Burnout has got worse because people, they sit at home and they're worried that the boss is going to call them on Zoom and they need to be there. So they're actually apparently we're doing more work, more chance of burnout. The kids are stuck in that little space in that formative year when you're trying to develop those relationships, especially for boys. I think women have a different way of forming relationships, but for boys, absolutely that social interaction, and it's so keen for us. It's so keen. It's so important for us, the social interaction. We lived for millennia in tribes where we relied on each other. We had to get on because somebody makes a mistake and we forget the tent, and people are living outside in the weather. It's only in the last few generations that we've started to silo ourselves into houses. So there's still this residual, social interaction. We're social creatures, and really quickly it's being taken away from us. When I grew up in New Zealand, but I don't even know if we had a lock on the front door, and it was sort of like it's getting dark. Oh, I'll ring mum and tell her I'm staying at my friend's place for dinner. No problem. Today, yeah, you couldn't do it's. But there's so many angles. I used to do multi-level marketing, so that was sort of going door to door, or walking, in one of the suburbs, and I was talking to one of my friends, women friends, and she was saying, "Oh, this little girl ran out of the house and down the street, only about 8 or 9." Ran out of the house down the drive and she tripped over and hurt herself. Not badly, but just scratched her knee. So I felt so sorry for her. I went over and sort of like picked her up. And then my friend said, she said, but if I was a male, I would turn around and walk the other way. I couldn't go near her.
yeah.
So because of, as a male in a public place, if you go near to a distressed child, it's never going to go right for you.
Right.
So, yes, we're losing that social connection, but there's all sorts of, there's all sorts of different impacts on those social relationships.
Yeah, I think that we became so the 70s and 80s, where I was growing up, right? The 70s and 80s, it was all we thought that millions of kids are being kidnapped every day, right? There was literally like all these ads and stranger danger and all this, the conversations about the the passwords, right? And all that kind of things that you were talking to so that you wouldn't get kidnapped. Well, the people that were really kidnapping people is the other parent, the divorced parent. And the other one was taking them, or the aunts of the other, on the other side or whatever. So it was never the stranger wasn't the issue.
Wasn't a stranger. And then all the photos of those kids were plastered on the side of the milk cartons. Mm-hmm. So it sort of made a mountain out of a molehill.
Yes. And so we became afraid of each other. Yep. And like you were saying,
locks on the front door.
I wouldn't necessarily, go up to a kid and pick him up. I wouldn't go to, my friend was in high school and he did wrestling. And as a gay man, I wouldn't go to the wrestling meet because I was afraid that someone would say something, and I was like, you know what? It's not even worth it. I will cheer you on. I will let you know, but just because then you're a perv, you're doing all these things, and I would be sitting in the stands. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just becomes we become a society that wants to put everybody into a label, and the other is bad, no matter what.
You either agree with me or you're the enemy.
Yes.
It's I find it fascinating. I'm in England at the moment, but I find it fascinating watching the America and Donald Trump with the politics, and everybody hates him. Nobody is asking the question, how did he get voted in? If everybody hates him, how did he get voted in? And they're seriously worried now. I mean, I'm not in America, but there is concern that he will get in again but everybody hates him. So what's going on? Everyone sort of says something on the step, but behind closed doors, they have a different opinion.
No. What it is. So I have friends that are Trumpers, right? And that's what they're called here in the U.S. They're Trumpers, right? It's my dad has been a Republican my whole life, and I've pretty much been a Democrat my whole life. So we've always had different views. But my dad is smart as a whip. Okay. If he says he can pull shit out of his, this is like his glory. He'll pull something up from the 1800s, a factoid that will make sense for this situation and how this is, and give you a whole thing. So anytime I have to open my mouth, I have to know what I'm saying.
Exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
Exactly what I'm saying. I've got to be, I will let you know exactly what it is and where it is and how I found this information. So the thing with Trump is that the U.S. system is broken. It's become dominated by business and capitalism. Okay,
it's not America. It's not just America. The rest of the world is as well.
It's everywhere, but America is broken, and we have become we're in a state where we're trying to progress. It's almost the same as when we were it's really almost the same as when we were getting rid of slavery, because we have added so many, but on so many other levels. So it's gay rights and trans rights and women's rights. And, and so the white male, which I'm obviously one, right? Started to fear, and there's a over politically correctness that's going on too.
Yeah.
So you get Donald Trump in there, who is
unashamedly.
He has ties to the KKK. He has no filter, and he's going to tell it like it is.
Yep.
But he's the first president I've ever had that I don't think was actually looking out for the country. He was looking out for himself.
So my argument would be, is he the first one that it's obvious he is, but the rest of them were as well? It's just obvious he is.
But I think that
he's not hiding it. He's not apologizing for it.
At the end of the day, though, I think that most of the presidents that we've had now, are they a little self-serving? Yes. Okay, but in general, they've tried to make the country better. In general, in their way, we have opposing views, we have opposing viewpoints. He's the first one that I looked at and was like, no.
Yeah.
So,
no, I agree.
but the thing with that is that what he was saying out loud, right, did make sense in some ways. And I'm going to get killed for this. So, when he's talking about America first and start this whole thing, there's some truth to that. Bring the troops back. There was some truth to this. We're not going out and policing everyone else. You can police your own damn selves. Okay, there's some truth in that. Okay, we did have a lot of treaties that were not benefiting us when it comes to some of the trade treaties that we had out there.
Yep.
Now, why? Well, because we actually make like 3 times more than anyone else GDP. I mean, let's face it, that's true. And it's not because we're better than anyone else. It's just this is what happened, right? We started policing everybody in our military. If we took half our military budget away and actually focused it back in the United States, this is what no one has been talking about lately.
Be a different country.
We would be a completely different country. If we just paid the United States citizens half of that budget, just got rid of taxes, income taxes, we'd be okay. But we're never going to do it because, see, if we were to do that, we would become weak in the world, and we would somehow we would end up, not keeping up. But the thing is that we never did keep up. We stole everyone else's technology. From the Germans on over. So, I think that go.
He's and that's the sort of thing he's doing, and a lot of people, I think, a lot of Americans, and it's similar sort of thing happening here in England, but in the States, it's like, why are we policing these countries? I spent the last 10 years in Myanmar, and the army stepped back in, and they've killed. So in Ukraine, I think they've lost 4,000 citizens. That's a ballpark figure, but it's around about that much. In Myanmar, the army stepped in. They can't win on the land with the troops, so they get aircraft, and they go into villages, and they just wipe the villages out. They've lost over 1,000 members of the public. 10,000 in jail, and when you go to jail, it's not quite the same as an American or an English jail. You don't want to go to a Burmese jail.
Yeah.
I bet none of the people listening to your radio show at the moment have heard of Myanmar or what the hell is going on there, because it's not strategically. It doesn't have oil. It's right in China's backyard, so of course it's a different thing. Whereas Ukraine is part of Europe, so there's the political things going on. And for Myanmar, it's quite sad. It's been forgotten. It's all about the Ukraine. Almost as many people have died in the two countries. One is internal. One is Russia against Ukraine. That's a political between a couple of countries. Myanmar's a country, and the world's allowing it to happen there. So you can sort of understand. I can see Donald Trump saying, make America first again. The same thing's happening in England. I'm from New Zealand, and it's a similar thing happening down there. And to most middle-class taxpayers, it sounds logical. It's like, why should I be supporting some war in Libya or countries that I've never even heard of and got no idea where they are? And we send all this money and ammunition and troops in, and that, and they spend 6 months and come. Or Afghanistan, there's so many foreign troops over the hundreds of years. The English first went in there and lost, and then the Russians went in there and lost, and the Americans went in there and lost. It's cost so much money, but it's cost. But all it's done is it's taken this money and it's fed it into this group of people in America that have made so much money. I was listening to Russell Brand the other day, and he said COVID has made $30 more billionaires in America
Mhm.
as a direct result of the vaccines and that. So they're fighting a war or COVID and that, but there's a few people making lots of money from it. So, but nobody will speak about it. Donald Trump gets lambasted by everybody. No, we don't want him, but he gets all this support, which I find nobody. I understand that. I just find it interesting nobody's talking about it.
I think that they are in the U.S. a little bit more than it's going to be internationally. It does get talked about,
Good.
and I think that what
Good.
ends up happening though is that they discredit the level of people that are actually listening to Trump as being ignorant and in backwater and the South
Yes.
and all these things, right? The people I lived with, when I first moved into my RV, I stayed with some friends, and they were full out Trumpers. My dad is a Trumper. One of my little brothers. It's both my little brothers, but my other little brother is less of a Trumper. He's just more of a go along. My one brother is really a Trumper, right? So, but they don't understand that when you build the middle class, that's what actually builds America in the world. In
Absolutely.
general.
It's the middle class where it all comes from.
But the problem is that we keep doing things that tear that apart, and policies that are tearing it apart. Now you're seeing all the entrepreneurship happening again. We're talking, one of the big things that happened in COVID was that people started businesses.
Yep.
Because their job went away, or they weren't working they weren't going to go back to a restaurant, right?
Yep.
And it's a lot easier to build a company now than it was before.
Well, yeah, you're sitting at home for 12 months. You can either watch Netflix, or a lot of people will be like, "No, I need to get some. I need to." Yeah, so it's great. And I think that's the way that things are going to change when people start to go, why are people supporting Trump? Or I don't have a job. What can I do? So people taking back individual responsibility. I think and that's why I want to support coaches. It's to actually support them to start to ask the questions and start to take back responsibility. Who do I support? Do I start the business myself? Instead of, it's easy for the big companies to control the masses, the government to control the masses when we're all sort of, we've got these jobs and we have all these restrictions and rules on us.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start the middle class start to take back responsibility, then it's not quite so easy for the governments to control what's going on.
It's very true.
I think that's really what needs to happen. Well, that's what I think needs to happen. People need to wake up basically and realize that they're being manipulated by CNN, constant negative news. We don't have television because CNN or MSNBC or BBC over here, it's all negative. It was COVID at Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's like, just give us some good. The trouble is, people don't want good news because they want to see other people in a worse situation.
I have the best example of this in Detroit here back in 2000, early 2000s, maybe late 90s, early 2000s. There was a campaign by all of our stations that said, "Say good about Detroit. Detroit 2020. This is the vision that we have for 2020."
Mm-hmm.
Right? At that point, Detroit was a friggin' war zone.
Mm.
I mean, literally, that's when you start hearing, you were hearing constantly about the fighting. We were number 1, number 2 in murders in the United States.
I heard about that. It was international. It wasn't just local.
Right.
It was, yeah.
It was absolutely horrible. The swaths of the city is just demolished. Like, we still have swaths of the city that's horrible, but it's gotten better, right? When we're talking before, it was probably 80% of the city was just bad. Now it's about 25, 30. Like, but what they did is they started telling good stories. Every newscast, every day, said something positive about what's going on in Detroit, something that they're doing, something that they're,
Cool.
every single one. They started talking about the suburbs and what was going on in the suburbs that was just as bad, right? This murder, that murder, this drug bust, this, because it was happening all over. It's just Detroit makes why would they go anywhere else, right? And Detroit now, if you look at what the plan was for 2020, it really is all there. Like, we're one of the number one places for tourism in the United States right now.
Really? Detroit,
Yeah.
number one for tourism. Fantastic.
Tourism. Number one place that they want to visit. Detroit's beautiful. Like, it really is beautiful. And Detroit has been beautiful, but they've really put in the structure back in. Woodward Avenue, there was a building on Woodward right around this time we were looking at. I was working with nightclubs. We were looking at this building, and it was perfect. It was beautiful. And it was on Woodward Avenue, which is the main thoroughfare for Detroit. And but everything around it wasn't there yet. Like, really, there was just nothing. Yeah. Now, and it's funny because the person that we were looking at it with, he passed away. And he said, maybe in 20 years, this will be okay. Now that whole place is like absolutely insane, has like 5 national chains on it. But the building, it never opened. And what they end up extending the other club that was next to it and just kind of pushed it over. And there's a big angel wings right there on that building. So it never did open. They just painted this really cool angel wings, selfie spot.
Yeah.
So I thought that was always funny.
It's the way when I'm talking to people, when I'm talking to coaches, if you get that constant negative stuff, you close down. It's a self-protection thing. We close the front door, we silo ourselves. If you're feeling, and you don't want to get into all this happy, clappy, positive stuff, that's just too far. But if you're starting to hear positive things, then you start to open up and you start to see the opportunities. The opportunity is always there. Mm-hmm. You just, when you feel a little bit, when your consciousness level, when your frequency, when your energy level is high, you're going to see opportunities. Mm-hmm. And I talk to coaches every now and then and how hard it is. And I'm like, I have a guy that I've worked with. I mentor him. He's in Yangon. Now, Yangon, I had to leave. We were sitting on the balcony in Yangon, in main city in Myanmar. And you could hear the gunfire over the other side of the river in the city. Every other day, there's a bomb goes off, whether it's the civilian groups or whether it's the army. It's a bit of a balance there because the army wants to discredit the civilian groups, so they let the bombs off. So that's the situation. I mean, and this guy decided to start a business, so he imports toys from China into Yangon, and he delivers them to his clients, the toy shops. Mm. And his biggest problem, he's been doing that for a year now. His biggest problem is he can't get the loan because most of the banks are closed, to buy a bigger car because his business is taking off. So how can you sort of sit anywhere in the West and say it's hard when he's doing that? Yeah, because it's all about what. So when we're talking, it's a conscious thing I'm doing it. So what went well? What went well? What worked for you last week? So I'm sort of setting up this positive frame, and that's the way that we see opportunities. If we watch the news, we watch CNN or MSNBC, we get depressed. COVID left everyone at home. We live in fear or just of that sort of bug that we can't see that might get us or might not get us, or we need the vaccine, or we have to wear masks, all this, and it just puts us at a lower frequency. We're not looking out to see the opportunities. Yeah. Until you get the right peer group. I'm doing a 5-day challenge in a couple of weeks, and it's about the power of your peer group. We sort of grow up and if my father's a dentist, then it's likely I'll become a dentist because that's the peer group that I've been exposed to. Most people don't take control of their peer group. They just, they go to school, that's their peer group. of all the, if you live in a house full of 10 drug users, you'll probably become the 11th drug user because that's your peer group. Step outside that and start to go, okay, so if I was selecting my peer group, if I was going to build it, who would I want in my peer group? So I can have a virtual one. I can have Richard Branson or Michelle Obama. I think she's great. I could have Michelle Obama in it, but I could also have a group, a Zoom call group or a physical group, but a group of people on Zoom that I can interact with. And I have one peer group, and they're from New Zealand, Australia. So it's about 8 o'clock in the morning, and for them it's 8 o'clock at night. And I'm like, guys, 8 o'clock on Friday morning is okay for me because I'm just getting into my day. Guys, it's 8 o'clock on a Friday night in New Zealand. Why aren't you out? Oh no, this is much more interesting because we get to talk about things and concepts and ideas. Or I could go to the pub and drink beer and talk about the weather or the football team or the baseball team, whatever. So it's looking for ways to get that positivity back into into our lives. Switching the news off, finding a peer group, or actually, and meeting different groups of people. So not sticking to, if I play football, sticking to that peer group. Starting art class and meeting a really different type of people, a different group of people, different ideas. That it gives us the creativity, but also because it's positive, we the opportunities appear more often. They're always there. We just didn't see them. But that's taking responsibility because the government, the powers that be, don't want us to do that because that's harder to control. People start to start their own jobs. Oh, okay, yeah. What?
See, I talk all the time. In the United States, we think about the big government being the federal level, but what really impacts your life is your city and county. So city, county, and state. If your district attorney, your state attorney here, right, they're the ones that has to take things to the Supreme Court. So it has to go through them pretty much to go to the Supreme Court. If you have one that actually thinks like you do, okay, then that's the issues that's going to go.
Yep.
So when you start these things, you know what I mean? It just, there's so much more that we have to take responsibility for in general.
But America's so much. I just get, having lived in different places in the world, France is great for the average person because the unions have sort of destroyed the country. So what you end up with is family companies. If you so in France, I'm not 100% right, but in France, if you employ somebody and they leave after a couple of years, you pay their unemployment. So it prevents companies becoming bigger. So the companies end up very, very small, very insular. The unions have a lot of power. The trains in Paris are on strike all the time. So it creates that culture there. And in America, so in the world, you have people that have companies that earn money, and then you have corporations. But in the States and America now, they're producing this third type of job where people can make money online. So they're not producing an item, a physical item. They're doing a service. Now, that might be with somebody in Australia. And that doesn't fall under the two sort of present business sort of paradigms. So there's states in America that are way more dynamic, that are actually doing things like that. And then having lived in Asia, Asia's the powerhouse. You can see England is slowing down, and Europe is sort of it's starting to slow down. America's still got. And this is an outsider's perspective, obviously. America's got the technology and the people that they're more willing to take a risk. In America, if you go bankrupt, then that's a positive, because you've stretched it, you've pushed the envelope, and you've made a mistake. Wow, but pull yourself up and carry on. In England, you don't go bankrupt. That's suicide. You never want to go that far. So there's always that restriction. In Asia, anything can happen. It's just so much more energy, and I can just see sort of focus is moving towards Asia. Australia and New Zealand are trying to jump on the Asian bandwagon because that's their geographical, economic sort of area. China, so New Zealand is sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place with America. Do we support America or do we support China? China takes 50-60% of the dairy product in New Zealand, which is several percentage of the GDP of the country.
Yeah.
But Asia's got the energy. America's got the dynamics. I mean, Chat GPT and crypto, all this stuff is coming out of the States. Now, when they try to actually make the smartphone, then they get the technology to make it, but to actually build it, they send that to China because it's cheaper. Europe is just going to play sort of catch up, I think, now. So there's a cultural consciousness. So we're talking before about the youngster, when you're very young, being affected by your environment, by your peers, but there's a cultural thing as well. The country that you live in, your state in America, and America just seems to. There's certain states that aren't, but there's states in America that just seem to be more dynamic, more willing to take a risk.
I think that right now, one of the things I like about what Europe's doing, right, is that they're really pushing for the digital nomad. There are so many cities in Europe that really, because I see this all the time. I'm a nomad, so I'm in a part of a lot of those groups. Although I'm not international, I'm RVing, so
Yep.
I'm in the States. But I see a lot of real push to bring in the nomads. They go to Asia.
It's not easy to do. Asia is like a lot of friends I've got live in Bali, in Indonesia, because Indonesia, some of those countries down there, it's like, shit, that's a good idea. But they changed the law.
Yeah,
Europe's a bit more established, so it is opening up. I think Asia's a bit more dynamic that way, but for sure, Europe is opening up as well.
Cheaper. The problem is,
it's cheaper to live in Asia.
It's so much. The Philippines. I was looking. I was working with a company that one of the CEO was working in living in the Philippines, and we were laughing because he's like, "Yeah, that's like $200. That's too," and we were looking for something that was like within $150 and $300 a month US, and I went. And I was doing some searches with him because he was like seeing this like microcosm, and I found some place that was literally on the water, like absolutely, I with a pool and everything. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like going, okay, how do I get there? And it was $175 a month US.
Yep.
There are cities in the Europe there like that. Malta, I think it's only $500 a month to live there. The problem with Malta is that you have to have $50,000 in the bank to be. You have to put $50,000 in the bank.
Yeah.
And there's others. There's a place in Poland that just came up.
Eastern Europe is opening up. One of my mentors, I do a lot of work with transurfing. It's a personal development sort of technology out of Russia, Vladimir Seland. But the American woman, Renee Garcia, she's just moved across to Tbilisi. A lot of Eastern Europe is opening up because it's having digital nomads in those countries. It's a way of getting some money, some dynamic sort of stuff going on there. And there's a lot of personal development training and courses happening in Eastern Europe. I'm not quite sure what it is about Eastern Europe. Those countries just seem to be opening up really fast. France, England, Germany, Spain, a little bit slower. I think the technology's there, but like Malta, you've got to put a big investment down. I mean, you have to go to Indonesia, but it's not 50,000. I think it's 5,000 or less. And in Thailand's the same. You've got to put a deposit down, but it's not onerous. But Eastern Europe's another one that's coming up.
So definitely, we totally went over time. I've had a really great conversation, and I will always have the conversation. But I don't want to keep
you only asked me one question. You only said, why do we do what we do?
This is why, and this is the conversation. It is always, I walk into these, I say this all the time. I walk into these, I read your bio when I go and put the stuff in. I read it. I kind of know who you are ish. I might go to your social media and I might look at something, but I come in for the conversation, and I want to be as fresh as someone that is listening. You know, I want to ask the questions as they come up, and you never know what the conversation is going to be.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
so much more fun. How do people get in touch with you, John?
The easiest way is on Facebook. It's just John Farrell EMF.
Awesome.
John Farrell EMF. That's the easiest way. I mean, yeah, it's the 21st century. Do people still have websites? The work I'm doing 6 months ago, it's different to what I'm doing today. Everything's just happening so much faster. So Facebook's a bit more flexible for me at the moment. So yeah, John Farrell EMF.
I got it. John Farrell EMF. Make sure you check him out. He is phenomenal, as you guys heard. I am so thankful that you were here today, and we got to have this great conversation. I
would have come to Detroit. I never realized it was the destination in the States. It's not something that's on my radar to go to.
You know what? Come into summer. Michigan is amazing in the summer. It's amazing depending on what you're going to do. We're the Great Lakes state. So, but if you're coming in the late spring, early fall, summer, you're great. Once you start hitting later fall, like you're starting to get into that cold and if you like that, we got great things for you here. It snows, there's ski places, there's all that. Me personally, no.
I like the heat. I've spent 10 years in Myanmar. A cold day is 25 degrees, which is about 80 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
On a cold day, it's sitting at 100 most of the time.
I'm not quite there. I'm not quite in that range, but I like a good 75, 85, Fahrenheit. So I lived in West Palm Beach, actually. For, a little over a year. So when you were in Fort Lauderdale, when were you there?
Oh, that was the 90s. That would have been the 90s, early 2000s.
So I was actually there in 98, 99.
Oh, okay. Maybe we crossed paths.
Exactly. But it's funny because I lived down there and I had the choice to stay or come back. And I decided to come back. A whole bunch of things happened kind of in a row. And it was like, okay, I came back home and I'm like, I was here in August and I had a sweater on because it was like 83 degrees here, but it was cold. I'm like cold. And I'm like in a sweater and I'm like shivering. Everyone's looking at me like I'm crazy. They don't realize the different heat that you get used to.
Yes.
When you're in that kind of climate. So, all right. We do need to go. Thank you, John. I appreciate you being here. I will talk to you very soon. Make sure you guys check.
Thanks for bringing me on, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks for listening to the Creative Nomad Show. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, go to creativenomadshow.com. There's also a link at the bottom. If you are a radical and would like to be a guest, you can apply to be on the show there. Thanks again, and know that you are loved. Awesome Life, we look for the world changers who want to live in creativity, authenticity, and profitability whenever, wherever. So check out trueawesomelife.com and let's get started.